I spent 7 years saving every penny, sacrificing nights out, vacations, and little luxuries, just to finally buy the home I had always dreamed of. When I invited my family to celebrate this milestone with me, not a single one of them came. That night, standing in my empty living room, I realized something that changed the way I saw family forever. Before we dive into this story, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you never miss a tale of justice. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments. Okay, let's get into it. The first night in my new house was supposed to be magical. I had imagined it for years, me standing at the threshold, holding the keys in my hand, finally stepping inside a space that was wholly mine. No landlords, rules, no roommates' clutter, no shared spaces where I had to compromise. Just my own little sanctuary, built out of sweat, patience, and discipline. 7 years is a long time to wait for anything. 7 years of living below my means. Skipping restaurants when co-workers went out, saying no to trips with friends, watching every dollar I earned flow straight into a savings account. I used to joke with myself that my dream home was like a child. I was raising a future I was carefully, stubbornly building even when no one else understood why. When the day finally came, I was almost afraid to touch the walls, as if the whole thing might vanish if I wasn't careful. The paint still smelled faintly fresh, the hardwood floors gleamed, and the light streaming in from the windows felt like it was blessing the space. I remember sitting cross-legged in the middle of the empty living room that first night, running my hands along the cool floorboards, whispering to myself, "This is mine. I did this." That pride is what made the emptiness later hurt so much more. Because when I bought that house, I didn't just buy it for me. I wanted to share it. For years, my family had made little comments about how I was too focused on money or missing out on life. They thought I was foolish for not living more freely, for not spending on the kinds of things they valued. So I thought, maybe once they saw what I had built, they'd understand. Maybe they'd finally see me not as the stubborn saver, but as someone who turned discipline into something beautiful. The housewarming was supposed to be that moment. I spent weeks preparing for it, picking out the right decorations, arranging furniture so the place felt warm and welcoming, even cooking some of our old family recipes so the night would feel familiar. I wanted them to walk in, breathe in the scent of spiced rice and baked bread, see the candles glowing, and know they were part of something special. But the night didn't unfold that way. I still remember standing by the front window, glancing out every few minutes, listening for the sound of a car door or footsteps up the path. I had laid out glasses on the counter, set the table neatly with the dishes I'd unpacked that morning, and even placed a bottle of wine my father always liked in the center. Every detail was perfect, except for one. The people. The hours slipped by, and no one came. At first, I told myself they were running late. My family isn't known for punctuality, so I shrugged it off. I poured myself a glass of water and tried to ignore the silence echoing around me. Then an hour passed. Then two. I called once, then twice, no answer. My messages remained unread. It wasn't until nearly midnight, when the food had gone cold and the candles burned down to stubs, that I let myself admit the truth. They weren't coming. Not a single one of them. The silence of that realization felt heavier than any noise could have. The house, which hours earlier had seemed so full of possibility, now felt cavernous and hollow. I sat at the table I had so carefully set, staring at the empty chairs, and felt a wave of humiliation crash over me. It wasn't just that they didn't show, it was that they didn't care enough to. That night was supposed to be a celebration, a moment of joy after years of sacrifice. Instead, it became the moment I realized my family's absence said more than their presence ever could. And that was only the beginning, in order for you to understand why that empty night hurt as deeply as it did. I need to tell you a little about my family and the way things always were between us. Because their absence wasn't really an accident. It wasn't a one-off mistake or a scheduling mishap. It was the final expression of a pattern that had been there all along, one I had ignored for far too long. I grew up as the middle child, in a family that didn't believe in slowing down to acknowledge individual milestones. My parents were practical people, but not in the way I was. They valued appearances, nice clothes, flashy cars, dinners out where the bill was slid onto the table like a trophy. My siblings inherited that same taste for the visible, the immediate. They lived for the moment. And while I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that, it often came with a dismissal of anything they didn't understand, and they never really understood me. I was the saver, the planner, the one who turned down an invitation to brunch because I had calculated how much that one meal could add up to over a year. My father used to shake his head at me, half amused, half critical, and say, "Money's meant to be spent, not hidden away like a dragon hoarding gold." My mother's approach was subtler. She'd smile sweetly and tell me I should treat myself more. But under that softness, there was always an edge, as if my carefulness was somehow a rebuke of the way she lived. Then there were my siblings. My older brother, Daniel, wore his arrogance like a second skin. He had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. Even when his choices backfired, like when he leased an expensive car he couldn't afford, or when his latest business idea fizzled out, he was praised for being ambitious. To him, my lifestyle was boring, laughable. He once joked, in front of our cousins, that I would die with a fat savings account and no stories to tell. Everyone laughed. I forced a smile. But inside, I felt like I was shrinking. My younger sister, Lily, was less cruel but no less dismissive. She loved to flaunt the trips she took, the designer shoes she splurged on, the dinners at new restaurants. Social media was her stage, and she played the role of the glamorous youngest child perfectly. She would tease me, saying, "You can't take money with you when you die, you know. What's the point of all your saving?" And though she said it with a laugh, the words always landed heavily. It wasn't just their words, it was the way they acted whenever I reached a milestone. When I graduated college, they arrived late, left early, and spent the ceremony whispering about where they'd eat afterward. When I got my first promotion, they brushed it off, saying things like, "Well, about time," as if hard work wasn't worth acknowledging. Over time, I stopped expecting much from them. I told myself it was just their way, that they weren't sentimental people. But still, deep down, I longed for recognition. For once, I wanted them to look at me and see more than the frugal odd one out. I wanted them to be proud. That's why the house meant so much to me. It wasn't just for walls and a roof, it was proof. Proof that the path I chose, the one they mocked for years, had led me somewhere solid. I wanted them to step into that house and feel it. The stability, the independence, the fact that I had built this life with my own two hands. I thought, maybe if they saw the result, they would finally understand the value of all those years I spent sacrificing. The irony is, there were warning signs even as I was planning the housewarming. When I first told them I had closed on the house, their reactions were lukewarm at best. My father made a sarcastic comment about how I must have been living like a monk to afford it. My mother just nodded and changed the subject to something trivial. Daniel rolled his eyes and said, "Well, don't expect me to help you move." And Lily, she smiled politely, but I could see in her eyes that she was already calculating Instagram angles, imagining how her feed would look with photos from my home. I noticed these things. I did, but I pushed them aside. I wanted to believe this time would be different. I told myself that people show up when it truly matters. That maybe, just maybe, I would finally have a moment where my family gathered around me, not to criticize, not to downplay, but to celebrate. So I sent the invitations. I called each of them personally, told them how much it would mean to me. They all confirmed, even sounded enthusiastic. Daniel joked about bringing a bottle of whiskey. Lily said she'd help set up decorations. And my parents promised they'd be there early to see the place before the crowd. For once, I allowed myself to believe their words. And that's what made the silence on the night of the party so brutal. It wasn't just that they didn't show up, it was that they had looked me in the eye, promised they would, and then broke that promise without a second thought. Looking back now, I can see it clearly. The housewarming wasn't the first betrayal. It was the culmination of years of small betrayals, each one dismissed or excused by me, until finally, they all came together in one undeniable act of abandonment. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back. The night of the housewarming is still sharp in my memory, like a wound that hasn't quite healed even after all this time. I had prepared for it with the kind of energy you'd put into planning a wedding. That might sound excessive, but to me, this house was the biggest commitment I had ever made. 7 years of sacrifice, of saying no when others said yes, of going without so that someday I could have something permanent and secure. I wanted to mark that milestone properly, not just with a key turning in a lock, but with warmth, with laughter, with the people who were supposed to mean the most to me in the days leading up to the party. My excitement bubbled over into everything I did. I arranged flowers in simple but elegant vases, lined up candles along the mantel, and set out the good dishes I had been saving for a special occasion. This was that occasion. I even spent hours preparing food, old recipes my mother had taught me when I was a teenager, ones that had always filled our kitchen with the smell of cardamom, cinnamon, and garlic. Cooking them made me feel connected to her, and I thought maybe when she walked in and smelled those familiar aromas, her heart would soften. Maybe she would smile at me in a way she hadn't in years. By the afternoon of the party, everything was ready. The table was set, the lights dimmed to a golden glow, and soft music played in the background. I slipped into a simple but beautiful dress, nothing extravagant, but something that made me feel proud of myself, like I belonged in the home I had built. I stood in front of the mirror, took a deep breath, and whispered, "This is your night." The first hour passed quickly. I checked the oven, adjusted the candles, refolded napkins that didn't need refolding. My phone buzzed occasionally with messages from friends sending good wishes, but my eyes were fixed on the driveway. I kept peeking through the curtains, waiting to see headlights sweep across the glass. Another hour passed. Still nothing. I told myself they were just running late. My family has never been good at punctuality. We used to joke about it. Actually, that any event with us should have a start time an hour earlier than necessary, because everyone would arrive fashionably late. I smiled at the thought, pouring myself a small glass of water to steady my nerves. But as the minutes turned into hours, that smile faded. The food grew cold on the table. The wax from the candles began to drip down the sides, hardening into little pools. The soft music felt mocking now, a soundtrack to a celebration that wasn't happening. I called once. No answer. I texted, "Are you on your way?" Silence. I tried again an hour later. Still nothing. By the third hour, hope was slipping away. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, refreshing the screen as if sheer willpower could force a reply to appear. My chest felt tight, my throat dry. The excitement that had carried me all week curdled into something heavy and bitter. Finally, at nearly midnight, I let the truth sink in. They weren't coming. Not my parents. Not Daniel. Not Lily. Not a single one of them. The realization hit me in waves. First, disbelief. Surely, something must have happened. Maybe there was an emergency. But no. No calls. No explanations. No frantic texts apologizing for missing such an important night. Then humiliation. I had decorated, cooked, set everything up. All for nothing. I imagined how ridiculous I must have looked, pacing by the window, checking my phone, clinging to hope like a fool. And then the hurt. The deep, raw ache of knowing they simply didn't care enough to show up. I wandered into the dining room and sat at the head of the table. The plates were still arranged neatly, the wine bottle unopened, the chairs waiting for people who would never fill them. I stared at those empty seats and felt as though they were staring back at me, accusing me of my own naivety. My hands trembled in my lap, and I had to clench them into fists just to keep myself steady. I could have cried then. I think most people would have. But instead, a strange calm washed over me, almost like frost creeping over glass. I realized, with a clarity I had never had before, that this was no accident. This wasn't a scheduling mishap or a moment of forgetfulness. This was a choice to dismiss me, to disregard my effort, to once again make me invisible in the very moment when I should have been seen. That was the night the line was crossed, because for years, I had excused their behavior. I had brushed off their lateness at my graduation, their indifference to my promotions, their mocking comments about my lifestyle. I had told myself, that's just how they are. They don't mean any harm. But harm doesn't always come as a slap in the face. Sometimes it comes as absence, as silence, as a refusal to show up when it matters most. And on that night, surrounded by untouched food and burned down candles, I knew I couldn't excuse it anymore. It wasn't just disappointment I felt. It was betrayal. That was the moment my story truly began. Not with the purchase of the house, not with the savings or sacrifices, but with the empty chairs at my table. That was the moment I realized something had to change. Because if my family could so casually disregard 7 years of sacrifice, what else would they disregard? How many more milestones would I let them trample over before I finally stood up for myself? That night, in the quiet of my dream home, I promised myself one thing. I would never forget how it felt to sit at that empty table, and I would never let them make me feel that small again. The morning after the housewarming, I woke up groggy from a restless sleep. The scent of last night's food still lingered in the air, stale now, heavy, and unpleasant. My first thought was that maybe, just maybe, I would find a message waiting for me. Some explanation, an apology, something that could soften the edges of what had happened. I reached for my phone with shaking hands. There were no missed calls, no voicemails, just a few unread texts from friends who had seen my posts about the party and were wishing me luck, asking how it went. My throat tightened as I typed back a generic, "It was nice, thank you." The lie felt bitter on my tongue. Later that day, I finally heard from my family, not with apologies or concern, but with casual dismissivness, my mother's voice, when she finally picked up my call, was breezy, almost distracted. "Oh, sweetheart, we didn't make it. Something came up. Something came up." No explanation, no remorse, just two vague words that erased an entire evening of my life. I tried to hold onto my composure. "You said you'd be there. I cooked. I waited all night." She cut me off gently, as though soothing a child having a tantrum. "You're making too big a deal out of this. It's just a house. We'll come by another time. Just a house." The words lodged in my chest like a stone. My house wasn't just anything. It was 7 years of missed dinners, patched clothes, and long commutes. It was every time I had chosen discipline over ease. But to her, it was nothing more than four walls I was being dramatic about. When I spoke to my father, it wasn't any better. He chuckled, as if the entire situation was amusing. "You know us. We don't fuss over things like that. You should have expected we'd be late." "Late?" I repeated, incredulous. "You didn't show up at all." "Well," he said dismissively, "it's not the end of the world. Don't be so sensitive." His words burned. Sensitive. As if expecting the bare minimum of acknowledgement from my own family was some kind of flaw. Daniel, my older brother, was worse. When I finally reached him, he laughed outright. "Oh, come on, you're not still sulking about that. We got caught up. Big deal. We'll swing by when we can swing by." As if my home was a gas station or a convenience store. As if my years of sacrifice were worth no more than a pit stop whenever it suited him. And Lily, my younger sister, didn't even bother to answer my call. Instead, she texted hours later with a message so flippant it made my blood run cold. "Sorry, sis. Busy night. We'll check out your little place soon." Your little place. I stared at those words until they blurred. She had reduced everything I had worked for: my pride, my independence, my stability, to a diminutive, condescending phrase. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I had thought the worst part was them not showing up, but I was wrong. The worst part was realizing how little they cared about the hurt they caused. It wasn't just absence, it was mockery. It was belittlement. It was their way of telling me, without saying it outright, that my achievements meant nothing to them. Over the following weeks, they only doubled down. My parents would mention in passing that they still hadn't gotten around to seeing the house, as though I had invited them to a movie they weren't interested in. Daniel made a joke at a family lunch about how I probably sat alone in my empty showbox, drinking wine with my reflection. Everyone laughed, except me. I sat there silently, pressing my nails into the palm of my hand to keep from crying. And Lily, she had the gall to post photos from a weekend getaway with friends. On the very night of my housewarming. Beaches, cocktails, smiling faces. When I confronted her later, she shrugged and said, "Well, I had already promised them. You can always have another party." Another party. As if celebration was something that could be rescheduled at her convenience. The more they dismissed me, the more suffocating it became. Every time I walked through my front door, I felt that ghost of absence hovering over me, whispering that my family didn't value me, didn't respect me. I had thought this home would be my sanctuary, but instead, it became a daily reminder of their cruelty. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about everything that had led up to it: the years of being ignored, belittled, overlooked. Their absence at the party had crystallized what I had always suspected deep down. To them, I was never going to be enough. Still, part of me clung to the hope that they might change, that they might surprise me with a visit, or an apology, or even a simple acknowledgement. But weeks passed, and nothing came. The silence grew louder, heavier, until it felt like it was pressing down on my chest. I realized then that if I didn't do something, if I didn't stand up for myself, I would drown in that silence. Their absence had crossed a line, but their mockery, that was what pushed me closer to the edge. And the moment would come, sooner than I expected, when I could no longer ignore it. The day everything snapped didn't begin like a storm. It started quietly, almost tenderly, as if the universe wanted me to lower my guard before striking. I woke up to a pale morning light filtering through the curtains. The kind of light that usually makes me feel hopeful, like the world is pausing just long enough for me to breathe. I made coffee, fed the cat, and sat by the kitchen window with my mug warming my hands. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to believe that the ache inside me had dulled, that perhaps I could move forward and stop letting my family's indifference gnaw at me. But peace never lasts long when you live under the shadow of dismissal. That afternoon, I stopped by my parents' house for Sunday lunch, a tradition I had clung to more out of habit than joy. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread should have been comforting, but instead it triggered a knot in my stomach. I told myself I'd endure it, eat quietly, and slip away early. At first, things seemed normal enough: small talk about the weather, my mother fussing with the dishes, Lily glued to her phone, Daniel scrolling through something and half listening. But then it began. Daniel leaned back in his chair and smirked. "So, how's the showbox? Still echoing when you walk?" Everyone laughed. The sound cut through me like glass. I set my fork down slowly, carefully, so my hands wouldn't tremble too visibly. "It's not a showbox," I said evenly. "It's a home. My home." He raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. "Oh, excuse me. Your palace, then." Did the cat enjoy the party more than we did? Another wave of laughter. My father chuckled. My mother covered her mouth. And even Lily giggled without looking up from her phone. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears, my face burning. My chest tightened with every breath, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You didn't even come," I said quietly, my voice sharp enough to slice through the laughter. The room fell silent for a moment, the air heavy. My mother broke it with a sigh, her tone weary and patronizing. "We've been through this, sweetheart. It wasn't that important. You shouldn't hold grudges over little things." Little things. The words cracked something inside me. I had replayed that night 100 times in my head, the candles burning low, the food growing cold, the silence of a doorbell that never rang. Each replay cut me open again, and now my own mother was telling me it was little. I felt my jaw tighten. It wasn't little to me. It was one of the biggest moments of my life. I worked for years to get that home, and you all dismissed it like it was nothing. Daniel rolled his eyes. "You're being dramatic, always making yourself the victim. We'll come by one day, all right? Don't make this into some grand tragedy." I looked around the table at each of them, their smirks, their indifference, their amusement at my pain, and suddenly the room felt suffocating. My pulse was racing, my throat closing. That was the moment, the breaking point. I pushed back my chair slowly, deliberately. The screech of wood against tile startled everyone into silence. "You know what?" I said, my voice trembling but steady enough to hold. Don't bother coming to my house. Don't bother pretending to care, because I finally see it now. You don't care about me. You never did." My mother frowned, her voice sharp now. "That's unfair. We love you." "Love me?" I snapped, the dam bursting. "Love doesn't look like this. Love doesn't laugh at my dreams or dismiss my milestones. Love doesn't reduce my years of sacrifice to a punchline at the dinner table. My father's brows furrowed, his tone stern. You're overreacting. That word overreacting was the final straw. I stood, my hands shaking. But for once I didn't try to hide it. I let them see my rage, my pain, my defiance. I'm done, I said, my voice breaking but clear. I'm done begging for scraps of respect. I'm done twisting myself into knots hoping you'll notice me. If my happiness isn't worth your time, then neither am I. The silence that followed was heavy, almost deafening. No one spoke. Daniel smirked faintly. Lily glanced at me like I was some spectacle. My father's jaw was tight, and my mother looked more annoyed than hurt. Not one of them reached for me. I grabbed my coat, my keys, and walked out of the house. The cool air hit my face like a slap, but instead of crumbling, I inhaled deeply. For the first time in weeks, maybe even years, I felt something sharp and liberating cut through the fog. Clarity as I drove home. The anger gave way to something steadier resolve. If they couldn't value me, then I would build a life where I didn't need their validation. Their absence at my housewarming had been the spark, but their cruelty today had lit the fire. I wasn't going to let it burn me down. I was going to use it to forge something stronger. That was the day I stopped waiting for them to show up. That was the day I began to think about revenge, not the petty kind, but the kind rooted in justice, in showing them exactly what they had underestimated. Asterisk after that final, furious drive away from my parents' house, I sat in my car for a long time with the engine off, the street lights pooling on the hood like pale coins. I could have let the hurt swallow me whole. Called them, begged for apologies, tried to stitch together something that felt real. But I had already promised myself I wouldn't be small anymore. Instead, I started planning. Revenge, for me, never meant cruelty. It meant clarity and consequence. If they wanted to treat my life as a punchline, then I would make the world see the seriousness of the thing they'd laughed at. I would throw the sort of celebration they'd ignored. But this time, I would make it impossible to excuse away. I would surround myself with the people who had shown up when it mattered, and I would let the world bear witness. First I made a list, not the thoughtless whose trendy guest lists that my sister loved, but a careful inventory of people who respected me, old friends who'd stayed when others drifted, co-workers who knew the late nights and the sacrifices, neighbors who'd watched my progress with genuine curiosity, and the few mentors who'd quietly sent congratulations when I hit milestones. I wrote names in a single column and, next to each, a few reasons why their presence mattered. This wasn't about numbers. It was about truth. Step 1 was logistics. Pick a date, send invitations, and set a tone. I wanted warmth rather than spectacle. No pretension, no hollow glamour. So I chose a late afternoon on a Sunday, the way light softens and becomes forgiving. I hand-wrote invitations for a handful of older friends who'd taught me how to make bread. For others, a personal message explaining why I wanted them there. I asked one neighbor, an amateur photographer who'd been kind enough to take photos of my cat when I was away, to come early and take a few candid shots. I asked a co-worker whose public-facing role involved event planning to help me with the flow and the small details. Where chairs would sit, how the food would be arranged, who would give a toast. I thought through every small detail like a chess player thinking 5 moves ahead. If my family had ignored me once, they would not be able to claim ignorance this time. I made sure the event was something people would naturally want to document, not because I craved attention, but because documentation would be my evidence. When people see and applaud something publicly, the absence of certain others becomes obvious. There was one other tactical choice: timing. I scheduled the toasts in the middle of the event, not at the end. That way, the emotional high point, the part people remembered and shared, wouldn't be buried. I asked my friend Sophia, who is an honest and articulate woman with a large network of thoughtful people, to give the first toast. She agreed without hesitation, and I felt my shoulders loosen. Having someone I trusted speak about me felt like armor. On the week of the party, I transformed the house into the kind of place I had envisioned for myself for years. I did much of the decorating alone. It was therapeutic. I lit candles in places where light would catch the paint just so. I pulled out the set of dishes I'd saved, arranged them with the care of someone performing a ritual. I prepared food that smelled like home: roasted chicken with lemon and rosemary, a pot of lentils my mother used to make, a tray of flatbread still warm from the oven. I wanted the place to feel familiar, not staged. I wanted people to relax into it and to say things like, "This feels like you." On the morning of the housewarming, I texted my photographer neighbor a gentle reminder and sent Sophia a short note with a line I hoped she might weave into her toast. Nothing scripted, only a thread. She did it her way, quietly, with patience. I also messaged a couple of close friends and asked if they wouldn't mind tagging the photos. They posted with the date and the words housewarming, not to manufacture anything, but because I wanted the event to be discoverable. That was the only part of the plan that felt slightly tactical. The quiet amplification of a genuine moment. People started to arrive in a steady, warm flow. There was a softness to the gathering that soothed the edges of my anxiety. When the doorbell rang and I opened it to see an old college friend on the threshold, holding a plant for my kitchen and grinning like it was a surprise party, something unclenched inside me. The living room filled with laughter, the kind that came from real happiness, not the performative chuckles I'd heard at family dinners. Neighbors brought small loaves of bread. Co-workers arrived with homemade dips. A mentor quietly handed me an envelope with a note inside praising my perseverance. No one asked to be seen on social media. They were present with me in the most old-fashioned sense, with their bodies, their attention, and their genuine warmth. Sophia stood and gave the toast I had hoped for. She spoke about how rare it is to see someone choose a life deliberately, to delay gratification not out of fear, but out of a steady belief in a future self. She spoke of the small daily acts that add up, the lunch you skip, the extra hours at work, the patience of someone who believes the outcome matters more than applause. Her words landed like a benediction. And for the first time since that first empty night, I felt understood. Between laughs and stories, my neighbor wandered from room to room, camera in hand. He captured the way the late sun pooled on the kitchen counter, the way someone's sleeve brushed the edge of the tablecloth, the quiet way my cat hopped onto a lap and dozed. My co-workers posted a few tasteful photos, tagging the location and writing small notes about the warmth of the evening. Someone uploaded a short video of Sophia's toast. The notifications started to buzz gently. Likes, hearts, comments from people who had been there and people who had known me long enough to mean it. When they congratulated me, and then the moment I had quietly hoped for arrived. Not as a roar, but as a ripple. A message popped up on my phone from a mutual cousin I hadn't spoken to in months. A simple line. Looks lovely. Wish we'd known. Another friend messaged. So glad I was there. You deserve this. They meant it. I felt a complex knot of emotions. Vindication. Yes. But also an odd tenderness. This wasn't about humiliating anyone. It was about surrounding myself with people who reflected back the value I had worked for. They were the ones who noticed, who celebrated in the way that matters. Throughout the evening, I moved from conversation to conversation, feeling the buoyancy of genuine camaraderie. When people asked about the story of the house, I told it plainly. The sacrifices, the years, the doubts. I didn't paint myself as a martyr. I told it as truth. Each time I spoke, people listened with the kind of attention that heals. That attention became the distinctive instrument of my plan. Witnesses who would naturally bear witness by the end of the night. The house felt full in the way I had always wanted it to be. Warm, noisy, alive. Candles were burned down to stubs again. But this time the wax pooled around the place settings like a map of where we'd been standing. People lingered on the couch, talking about books, work, the small joys of the city. My cat curled at my feet, purring as if to approve. I didn't gloat. I didn't post anything self-congratulatory. I let others tell the story, and they did so with kindness. Photos and short clips circulated online, natural, unforced, honest. My phone buzzed more than it had since I bought the house. Messages of love, of pride, of congratulations. It felt substantial. It felt earned later that night. As I washed the last dish and stacked it carefully, I allowed myself a small, private smile. The plan had been executed cleanly. I had invited people who truly cared, crafted an environment that encouraged generosity of spirit, and quietly ensured the evening would be visible to the world in ways that mattered. The unique weapon I had discovered months earlier, community and documentation, had been wielded without malice, only purpose. I sat at my kitchen counter with a cup of tea in my hands, the house humming softly around me. I knew the posts would travel, and that the people who had mocked me would see them sooner or later. I did not plan to gloat when they did. I simply wanted the truth of the evening to exist in public view, so their absence could no longer be rewritten as a misunderstanding. I wanted the record to show that I had people who celebrated me, whether they chose to or not. And as the photos continued to trickle in, messages of warmth arriving like small beacons, I felt a steadiness settle over me that I hadn't felt in a long time. This was not revenge in the petty sense. It was justice rendered through recognition, a clear, undeniable showing of who I was and who had my back. The next part of the story, how they reacted when they saw the world celebrating something they had chosen to ignore, was coming. But in that luminous, ordinary hour, with the tea cooling beside me, and the sound of a friend laughing in the other room, I allowed myself to simply be present in the proof I had made. The morning after my second housewarming, my phone buzzed before I had even finished my coffee. Normally, early texts meant a coworker needed something, or a neighbor was asking about the recycling schedule. But this time, the screen lit up with my mother's name. I hesitated before opening it, my thumb hovering in the air. We hadn't spoken since that awful dinner, the night I walked out and promised myself never to beg for scraps of respect again. I opened the message slowly, as though it might explode in my hand. Her words were sharp and strangely defensive. I saw the pictures. You could have told us you were having another party. It's humiliating to be excluded from your own daughter's life like this. I stared at the screen, a slow heat rising in my chest. For a moment, I almost laughed at the irony. Excluded, humiliated. Those were my wounds, not hers. Yet here she was, trying to twist the knife as if I were the villain. I didn't reply. Not yet. Within an hour, more messages followed. First from Lily. So you do know how to throw a party. I guess you didn't need us after all. The words dripped with bitterness. But underneath I sensed something else. A small, unacknowledged sting. She had built her identity on being the fun one, the one people wanted to be around. And now she was watching proof that people had gathered around me, without her name anywhere in the photos. Then came Daniel, his message blunt and laced with condescension. Heard you had the neighbors over. Don't get carried away. One little gathering doesn't make you important. I set my phone down, shaking my head. It was almost too perfect. They were scrambling to downplay what had happened, but the very fact that they felt compelled to comment showed the truth. They were rattled. My small act of celebrating with people who cared had punctured their narrative that I was pathetic, alone, forgettable. Later that week, the confrontation came face to face. I had gone to the grocery store, a simple errand on a quiet afternoon, when I ran into my parents by the produce section. My mother spotted me first, her face tight, her lips pressed thin. My father stood behind her, arms crossed like a judge preparing to issue a sentence. So, my mother began, her voice dripping with that fox casual tone she always used before a scolding. I suppose you enjoyed your event. I met her gaze evenly. I did. It was wonderful. Her nostrils flared. And you didn't think to invite your family? Do you know how cruel that looked? People are already asking questions. There it was, the heart of it. Not regret for missing my milestone, not guilt for mocking me, but fear of what other people thought. I felt an unexpected calm wash over me. You weren't there the first time when I invited you. Why should I ask again just to give you a chance to humiliate me twice? My father's eyes narrowed. You're making us look bad. Do you realize the damage this could do to our reputation? And there it was, the admission, laid bare in the middle of the grocery store. Not love, not concern, reputation. I let the silence stretch, my heart beat steady. Then I said, clear enough for both of them to hear every syllable. The only people who think less of you are the ones who saw how little you think of me. That's not my doing. That's yours. The words landed like stones dropped into water. My mother's face flushed crimson, her lips trembling as if she might argue. But no words came. My father's jaw clenched, but his silence was louder than any denial. For the first time in my life, I saw them speechless, not because they had nothing to say, but because the truth was too sharp to touch. I picked up my basket and walked away, my step steady, my spine straight. Behind me, I heard the faintest sound, my mother muttering something to my father, her voice breaking in frustration. But I didn't turn back. That was their downfall. Right there in the middle of the grocery aisle, the realization that their cruelty had become visible, that their dismissal of me had not erased me but revealed them. Their laughter at my expense had turned into a mirror reflecting their own emptiness. For once, they were the ones left standing in silence, powerless to rewrite the story. The real moment of victory didn't arrive with fireworks or shouting matches. It came quietly, but with the kind of force that leaves no doubt about where power now rests. It happened a few weeks after the confrontation in the grocery store. By then, the photos and stories from my second housewarming had made their way through the extended family. Grapevine, aunts and uncles who had always been lukewarm toward me started calling. Curious and a little guilty, I saw the pictures. They'd say, "The house looks beautiful. You must be so proud." Each time, I smiled and answered graciously. Not once did I bring up my parents or siblings. I didn't need to. Their absence in every story, every photo, spoke louder than anything I could have said. And then came the family gathering. My cousin was graduating, and nearly everyone was there. The uncles who always bragged about their children. The cousins who never missed a chance to compare jobs. Even the distant relatives who treated these events like a spectator sport. My parents, Lily, and Daniel were, of course, present, standing in their usual little cluster. I entered quietly, carrying a modest gift, not trying to make a scene. But the scene made itself. The first relative who spotted me was Aunt Claire. She walked over with a wide smile and said, loud enough for half the room to hear, "Oh, there she is, the homeowner." The word hung in the air like a spotlight. Conversation slowed, heads turned. Someone else chimed in. "I loved the photos from your party. That kitchen, you must be so happy." Suddenly, it was like a dam breaking. One after another, people came up to me. Cousins, uncles, even friends of the family. They wanted to know about the house, the garden, the way I'd managed to save for so many years. Their admiration wasn't loud or performative. It was genuine. But its timing couldn't have been more perfect, because as they gathered around me, my family stood off to the side, watching it unfold. Lily's smile was brittle. Her phone clutched like a lifeline. Daniel crossed his arms, his jaw tight. My mother tried to look gracious, but the tightness around her eyes betrayed her. My father's face was unreadable, but his silence was louder than anything. I didn't gloat. I didn't even glance their way at first. I simply answered questions, shared little details about the renovations, and thanked people for their kind words. All the while, I felt their absence like a shadow behind me, not in the room's attention, but in the way no one mentioned them. Then came the moment that sealed it. My cousin, the guest of honor, raised his glass in a casual toast. "To new beginnings," he said. Then, with the innocence of someone who hadn't learned to tiptoe around family politics, he added, "And to my name, for showing us all what patience and hard work can build." Your housewarming looked amazing. The room erupted in cheers, glasses clinking. People turned to me, smiling, clapping lightly. It wasn't a grand ceremony, but it was recognition, public, undeniable recognition. I looked across the room and caught my mother's eyes. For the first time, I saw something there I had never seen before. Not pity, not dismissal, not even anger. Shame? Her smile faltered. She looked down into her glass. That was it. That was the payoff I had been waiting for. Not revenge in the form of insults or vengeance, but justice in the form of truth. They had dismissed me, ignored me, laughed at me, and now they were the ones on the outside, watching as the people they cared so much about impressing saw me for who I truly was. I raised my glass back to my cousin, smiling. "To new beginnings," I echoed, and in that simple moment, surrounded by people who had chosen to see me, I felt the final weight lift. They couldn't take this away. Not the house, not the respect, not the recognition. The story had already been written, and it wasn't theirs anymore. That was justice. That was closure. Asterisk in the weeks following that family gathering, something subtle but powerful shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking into rooms carrying the weight of being the overlooked daughter. The narrative had changed, and I didn't even have to force it. It changed because the truth finally had space to breathe. Calls came more often. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years reached out with small notes of encouragement, sometimes under the guise of asking about homeownership advice. But I could sense the respect tucked between their words. Even distant relatives who had barely noticed me before began acknowledging my achievements. It was strange at first, but I let myself accept it. I had worked hard for this, and I wasn't going to apologize for it anymore. As for my parents and siblings, their behavior was harder to define. There were no grand reconciliations, no teary apologies. My mother still sent the occasional clipped message, usually about logistics for an upcoming family event. My father remained mostly silent, Lily tried, once, to bring up the house casually. I drove by the other day. It looks nice, but her tone was hollow, and I didn't take the bait. Daniel, predictably, stayed distant. What mattered wasn't whether they changed. It was that I had, because I finally realized something that had taken me years to see. My worth had never been theirs, to grant or deny. All those times they made me feel small. All those years they brushed me aside. None of it had truly defined me. I had been defining myself all along, through every sacrifice, every long night, every moment I kept saving when it would have been easier to give up. The house became more than just a place to live. It became a symbol of resilience, of patience, of quiet determination. Every room told a story of endurance. The living room where I hosted friends and family on my terms. The kitchen where I cooked meals with no one standing over me, belittling my choices. The garden that bloomed slowly, stubbornly, just like I had. And as time passed, I found peace not in proving them wrong, but in no longer needing to. Their opinions, once so heavy on my shoulders, had shrunk into something distant and almost irrelevant. They could gossip, they could sulk, they could pretend. It didn't matter. I was free from it. The most unexpected part was the way others began confiding in me. Friends, co-workers, even neighbors would quietly share their own stories of being overlooked, undervalued, or dismissed by family. And as I listened, I realized just how universal my story was. We all crave recognition, but sometimes the most powerful recognition comes when we finally learn to give it to ourselves. I would be lying if I said I never thought about my family's faces that night at the graduation party, the way their silence spoke volumes as everyone celebrated me. That image is burned into my memory, not out of spite, but as a reminder that no one can erase years of hard work, no matter how much they tried to belittle it. Justice didn't arrive with their downfall. It arrived with my triumph, and that became my new normal. Living without needing their approval, knowing that my life was built on foundations they could never take from me. For the first time, I wasn't looking back, hoping to be seen. I was looking forward, fully seen, by myself most of all. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.